Forspoken to me looks pretty good. It looked fast and pretty, and it looked like it'd be fun to play. It had a pretty good writing team behind it. Gary Whitta, who worked on Star Wars Rogue One, and Amy Hennig, who worked on Michael Jordan, Chaos in Windy City, among some other games you wouldn't need a map to find. Yeah, like they're both on the team. It seems like a game that has elements that I would like. But is it something I would like? I don't know. The reviews for it are out. So I guess what we're going to do is review those reviews and find out together. That's right. It's 2023's first reviews and review for Forspoken. With 62 reviews on Metacritic and a rating of just 68 and a measly 28% recommended on OpenCritic, Forspoken does not appear to be a game that I necessarily want to check out, not at least if we just take the numbers at face value. Obviously, this is reviews in review, and we don't do that, but wow. It's setting things up, isn't it? Something interesting to note is that Forspoken, all of the reviews for Forspoken are on PlayStation 5. It's a console exclusive, which means you'll only find Forspoken on the PlayStation 5. You won't find it on the Xbox or the Nintendo Switch or the Atari Lynx. But you can find it on PC. PC is often sort of held out of these console exclusive deals, and that's the case here. That said, there's been no reviews of the PC build, and I find that kind of concerning because the system specs, the requirements for Forspoken on PC are pretty hefty. So yeah, not getting to see any reviews of it on PC is kind of worrying. Anyway, because the reviews tend to be or are trending in the negative direction, we're going to start with the high scores first and go from there. Let's do that. All right, the highest score for Forspoken was written by Joseph Mora. They gave the game a 9.5 out of 10, and they wrote their review for GamingNexus. Let's check out their closing paragraph. Forspoken is absolutely fantastic. With all the spells you can unlock, the gear you can upgrade, the fights, the bosses, and a storyline that rivals the best video game stories, this isn't a return to form for Square Enix. It's a testament that they still got it, and will have it for a very, very long time. All right. It's a little bit clunky, I guess. I didn't realize Square Enix had lost it, and apparently they haven't, according to Joseph, who strongly believes that they still got it. Let's see if the rest of the review is as glowing as this closing paragraph. When you start in Cipro, you are taught that you can craft items from items you find in the wild. Different ore, flowers, grass, and things will help you craft items and upgrade your gear. This is pretty straightforward. If you go to a craft table in a cottage, you can turn items in for more healing pods and storage capacity, plus craft more healing pods with the push or hold of a button. You can also add attributes to all your gear and even upgrade your necklaces by category, but only if you have the materials to do so. The game makes this process easy. If you have the materials, congrats, you're on your way to an upgrade. You can either combine two items to make one item, or go back out into the wild, collect the necessary materials, and fast travel back. You need some of these materials to also change your nails. Nails will give you an extra boost or boon, sometimes at the cost of another. The coolest mechanic in the game is that you can also camp the majority of the time. You hold the down button, and if you have firewood, Frey can craft, upgrade, and rest right there on the spot. So if you find yourself running low on healing pods, start a fire and craft some new ones. Simple, efficient. Frey. This review is psychic warfare. This is like an attack on the brain. This is like violence against the reader, a linguistic lashing that, I don't know, it's designed to make your brow furrow and your brain like fog over while you desperately try to work out whether you know what anything means anymore. The SCP Foundation should like do something, send people to do something about this review. It is terrifying. It begins with an extremely detailed account of how Joseph loves the Final Fantasy series, every single Final Fantasy game. And then it goes straight into more details about how Joseph refuses to play anything that isn't Final Fantasy, which I think is, well, it's honest, I suppose, but yeah, weird as well. That ends by telling us that they don't want to go into too many details. They'll keep the review as vague as possible so that they can preserve the experience for the reader, and then they spend the next 500 words going scene by scene and detailing the entire first act of the game. It is mind-boggling. One thing said and then another thing happens, and it's just there's no, I don't know, it just happens so quickly that you barely have time to register it in your brain. Like, I don't know. Like I was there. There were so many paragraphs I could have picked out of this review to analyze. I picked the one above because it actually terrifies me. I feel like I don't know what's going on when I read it. Like, there's so much detail about nothing. The coolest feature, if the coolest feature in your game is that you can camp most of the time, like, you can camp most of the time. That is a sentence that belongs in the most negative review of this game. If that's the coolest feature that Forspoken has to offer, that is a chilling indictment of how bad Forspoken is. But to Joseph, it's the best. It's the greatest thing to ever happen. That's what this review does. It attacks you. It eats through your understanding of what words mean, or what ideas are, what concepts are. Like, you feel like you're losing your grip on reality the more you read it, because it over explains things to an insane degree. It did go into weirdly specific detail about what painting your nails can do. So I guess maybe it's right. Maybe camping is the coolest thing ever. It's terrifying. I don't know. I don't know. Something should be done. Maybe the Bureau of Control could come in, get Jesse Faden on the job. I don't know. I'm still scared by this review. Let's move on to hopefully something less terrifying from Gaming Trend. David Flynn at Gaming Trend, who gave it a 9 out of 10. Forspoken is an incredible title. Although the story suffers from being a bit too generic, the gameplay is inventive, magical, and an absolute blast. This is a game I'll come back to again and again just to move around and exist in the fascinating fantasy world. Forspoken is an exciting leap forward for action games, and I can't get enough of it. It sure seems like even the positive reviews are flagging up front that the story isn't great, which, I mean, I guess it actually does make sense, right? Like, if I think back to, I mean, you know, my game of the year last year, I couldn't tell you any of the specific story beats from Elden Ring. I think I know I'm a foul tarnished. I know that much, but otherwise, I got nothing. You could quiz me for days. I played that game for 215 hours, and yeah, I got nothing. I know R1 makes things stop hurting me eventually. R1 and circle. But yeah, story beats. But that's the thing, right? Sometimes it just doesn't matter. If the gameplay's good enough, then the story you can just ignore it, right? Let's see if that's how it pans out in the bulk of the review from David Flynn. You have very little stamina at the start and even fewer moves to restore it, so if you run out, you'll be forced to jog while it recovers. You can learn moves to restore stamina, however, like a launching jump performed just after you hit the ground or a timed dash to further accelerate you. They don't remove the issue entirely, as you still need to actively plan your route so you can use these moves, so parkour only gets more fun and involved as you go. The best part is that the game doesn't actively tell or tutorialize you on how to use all these moves, you figure them out on your own. One of my favorite moments was when I figured out how to completely negate fall damage, which massively drains stamina, by using the fire grapple on the ground. I don't think I've felt this much pure joy in movement since Gravity Rush, and this feels like the closest follow-up to that series we'll get with the death of Japan Studios. In all honesty, I wish there were more pure platforming sections. It's that good. This whole review does a really good job of explaining why David felt that Forspoken deserved a 9 out of 10. It actually makes sense to me the way they describe it. Yeah, I get it, right? Movement is so often ignored in the puzzle of creating a video game. It's usually just that's how you get to the next fun thing, right? But when games make the movement fun, then that can be massive for the experience. And it seems by David's measure that Forspoken does exactly that. Let's jump to the medium scores to see if that continues, that trend continues. All right, we had 52 medium scores. I know I got to find some system that's better than just, you know, grabbing everything between the top and bottom scores. But as it stands now, yeah, the bulk of the scores are medium scores. That's unless someone has a suggestion on what I can do, that's probably how it's always going to be. Yeah, we rolled a 25 and a 45 out of our scores. The 25 gave us Kyle Gratton at Screen Rant's 3.5 out of 5 review. Luminous Productions clearly had a vision for Forspoken, and it shines through brilliantly when the player is unshackled and left to their own devices in the gorgeous game world, buoyed by Forspoken's atmospheric music. Unfortunately, the narrative's pacing has left it feeling as though it was significantly scaled back during development. Forspoken is sprawling, awing in its scale and a treat to look at, and while the gameplay is snappy and engaging, it's not necessarily impressive enough to completely distract from haphazard discussions with NPCs and a narrative that should have been given more space. Well, I think this is our first glimpse at what might have gone wrong, right? The story thing can cut both ways. If the gameplay is great and the story is ignorable, as it is with Elden Ring, I mean, not to discount the phenomenal stuff that Vardy Video and the other lore nerds do with those games, but you know, you can ignore it pretty easily. Is more what I'm saying, not that it's something that you should ignore. But if it is ignorable, then yeah, the gameplay can shine and take over, especially if it's great. However, if you can't ignore the story, then it can be difficult for the game to overcome the gameplay to overcome that story, right? Let's see how it goes in the bulk of the review. It's with odd dialogue and a slew of introductory missions that Forspoken gets off to an unfortunately slow start. The game asks the player to patiently sit through its world building before it fully displays its strengths, and even then Frey's first big quest into Athia's wastes isn't entirely convincing. It took entirely too long, somewhere between 8 and 10 hours, granted, with a hefty dose of side content and exploration, for Forspoken's gameplay loop to finally click. Following the first major boss is another foray into the lives of Sipel, Chipple, Kipel, I don't know, citizenry, after which the player is really able to stretch their legs with Forspoken's chaotically fun magic and parkour. Yeah, okay, so it's a question of pacing then, right? Like, that's the toughest balancing act for video games, because people play at their own pace, and so it's very difficult for a game to necessarily know, especially an open world game, to know when you're going to hit certain marks or certain story beats, things like that, and that can really complicate things. Some games do it really well. You know, I hate to go back to this example, but Elden Ring, I think, did it really well because it didn't matter. But yeah, some games it can be really overbearing, and that, I don't know, that seems to be the case here for Kyle with Forspoken. They seem largely positive about the game, though. I think they do a pretty compelling job of justifying how they came to their conclusions. And yeah, I think there's actually a pretty good review, right? Like, yeah, I like this review. Forspoken be like far from the first game to have railroaded a player for 8 to 10 hours. Like, if I learned anything from the GamingNexus review before I neuralized myself, it's that Takeshi Aramaki, who was creative lead on Forspoken, also worked on Final Fantasy 13, and that was a game that took the 13 as a challenge for how many hours the tutorial should last for. So, yeah, it's maybe a bit of a trend. Anyway, let's jump on to the next review from IGN. Tom Marks wrote their review and gave the game a 6 out of 10. Forspoken's flashy combat and parkour can be fun, but they aren't enough to make its cliche story and bare-bones open world very interesting to explore. Here we have another medium review where the game is capable of being fun, but not capable of overcoming its pitfalls. That, I think, is where these reviews will continue to go. If you didn't think that the game was able to overcome its sour notes, then yeah, I don't see how you could love it. And we are, you know, working our way down the list. So anyway, let's look at the body of Tom's review for IGN. Actual bonding apparently happens off-screen, and this story, which is mostly told through exposition dumps between large stretches of open-world exploration, felt fairly rushed across the 15 hours it took me to beat the campaign as a result. That means the snippy banter between Cuff and Frey come off as obnoxious rather than endearing. Frey is surprisingly vocal about her disdain for most of the tasks Forspoken asks you to complete, and Cuff constantly belittles her for no good reason in a manner that I think is supposed to come off as friendly ribbing, but instead feels like awkwardly watching a couple argue at a dinner party. This dynamic never really changes, even as Frey slowly goes through the motions of her predictable hero's journey, and it is always exhausting. I really like this paragraph because it contextualizes. It gives us a lot of background from the game about beyond simply, oh my god, the dialogue's so cringe, right? Which is sort of, you know, it makes a lot of sense that you'd see that on Twitter or Reddit or something like that, because people aren't expending a lot of words to say something as simple as, you know, I find this dialogue bad. But what Tom does here is they get to the heart of why the dialogue doesn't work for them. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I figured while I was watching some of those clips some of the clips of the, the cringe dialogue, was that maybe I'm just missing context, right? Maybe with some context, this dialogue wouldn't be so bad. What Tom argues is that the context doesn't exist in the game, right? And that is a fatal error, I think. Yeah. Anyway, this review was very good. I think Tom did a really good job of summarizing how they felt. Let's jump to the low scores. All right. If you're one of the super fans of this show, of this series, then you'll have noticed that we skipped the unscored reviews. I want to explain that real quickly before we actually jump into the low scores, even though you did see the splash screen for low scores just then. We're going to do this right now. One of the problems I have with unscored is there's only like 5 sites that do unscored reviews. And while generally I have enjoyed the unscored reviews that we talk about, one of them's not in English, and so we do tend to have a review from just the 4 same sites over and over and over again, and that's not something that I want. I don't want this to be a highlight for Polygon or whatever. I want this to actually feel like it's grabbing from a random assortment of reviews, because that's the essence of reviews in review. So what I've done is, because RG is important, I flipped a coin to see if we would do any unscored reviews, to see if we would include them this time. And I'll do it next time, unless you think that idea is exceedingly dumb, in which case let me know in the comments. But yeah, we landed on tails, and so I'm not doing any unscored reviews. We're going straight into the low scores. There were 3 of them. We rolled a 1 and a 2. And yeah, the first one is from AusGamers. It was written by Steve Farrelly, and he gave it a 4 out of 10. Add to this a less than likable Frey who barely manages to endear herself upon the player, and even less likable NPCs, and a bland game world I have no desire to learn more about, let alone live in. Take me back to New York and my real world troubles there, please. And you have a game that just lacks. Alrighty, well, first things first, I am friends in real life with this writer, Steve. I've known him for more than a decade. We're good buddies. And yeah, so I wanted to get that bias out of the way first, right? It's about ethics in games criticism, right? Yeah. That said, we can still review this review, I think. For example, this is a 60-word sentence, Steve. You can't just chuck an ellipsis at the 59th word, right, and pretend that that's going to make up for the 3 full stops you should have used already in the rest of the paragraph, right? I'm not gonna accept that. Let's jump into the bulk of the review with a paragraph from it, I guess. How the game tries to stand out, then, is in its stackable, near-turn-based magic, defensive and offensive, and in its traversal system you've probably heard touted as magical parkour. We'll tackle that second one shortly, but to begin with, the game's fairly interesting but far from perfected combat setup is a good idea on paper, but rarely delivers in what it wants to be. For one, the game's controls aren't very responsive, which can make aiming your ranged abilities among multiple baddies a bit of a pain. And 2, the way in which you need to swap abilities on the fly with L1 or R1, where time slows, is sluggish and convoluted. I get where the team was going with it, but it simply doesn't flow, which is kind of antithetical to the stylish, fast and fresh angle Forspoken has been billed as. Look, I already admitted to being friends with Steve, but I thought this review was good. I mean, I didn't do anything. I didn't talk to him about this review. I haven't talked to him about this review. I won't until this review of his review goes up. But yeah, I do think it's quite good. What he does really well, and it's not evidenced in the paragraph I grabbed, but what he does quite well is by literally calling out the tropes and the steps from the very generic save the cat story structure of Forspoken. he illuminates how very bland the story is, and it paints a very vivid picture of why the story didn't work for him. As to the paragraph I chose, I picked it because, what has to have failed is the gameplay, and I think Steve does a good job of explaining how it failed. The parkour too didn't work for him the way that I think it did for others, and again, he does a good job of laying out why it didn't work. I learned a lot from this review, so I think it was good. Makes sense, right? Anyway, let's jump to the last review. Before we move on, there was something I didn't like about this review. There is a Jeopardy reference, like out of nowhere. It doesn't link to anything. I don't know what it's doing. It's like it's just a sentence, and it's a Jeopardy reference. Like, the Daily Double. The reason it's a problem is because it's the pull quote in OpenCritic, which when I read it in OpenCritic, I'm like, oh, okay, I can't wait to see how we arrive at a Jeopardy reference in this Forspoken review, and then it never happened, so that was upsetting. Anyway, moving on to Dexerto. They got Alex Garton to write their review, and Alex gave it a 2 out of 5. While Forspoken delivers a solid action-based combat system and an array of challenging bosses, it fails to create an engaging narrative thanks to the surface-level characters and at times unbearable dialogue. Not only that, the outdated open world feels like more of a checklist rather than an opportunity for exploration, leaving you yearning for landscapes from other games that are more memorable and less lifeless. Ultimately, Forspoken lives or dies with its combat, so if you fell in love with it in the demo, it may be worth your time. However, if you're looking for an engaging RPG that immerses you in its world with a strong main narrative and interesting side activities, this is certainly not it. Oh, the negative reviews for this game are ruthless, hey? Like, that's a great closing paragraph. I think I like that Alex determined that there might actually be an audience for this, and they referred to the demo as something you could play to find out if it's your speed. But even that they used as a setup, as the alley to their oop on that last sentence. Let's see if the rest of the review has the same ferocity. The most damning evidence of this is frequent swearing that serves no purpose and is forced into speech for no apparent reason. To my count, Frey used the F word a total of 21 times throughout my playthrough, and almost every time she said it, it felt forced. Is 21 a high number of fucks? Like, if the game takes between 15 to 30 hours to finish, based on estimates from other reviews, because we didn't get an estimate from Alex here. That's like one F word every 90 minutes. That doesn't seem like a lot of fucks to be given. I don't know. I found that to be odd. The rest of the review is actually like more positive than the closing paragraph, but at the same time, still fairly negative. I think Alex does a good job of laying out why they thought the game didn't work for them, but overall, I would say that it doesn't necessarily read like a 4. Dexerto does a proper 5-point scale, and so it reads more like a 2 out of 5 than it does a 3 out of 5, but it doesn't read like a 4. Which is, I guess, the problem with the review aggregate, the score aggregate system, right? This score sits alongside all other scores. That is, of course, why you need me. Right? Anyway, let's jump to some conclusions in the conclusion. Yeah, so Forspoken doesn't really seem like a bad game to me. It appears to run well on the PS5, and while the the combat and parkour are apparently kind of clunky, that's clunkiness that people are able to overcome, right? Like, so, you know, the gameplay could be there, and there is a demo out, so you could find out for yourself. The world that Luminous created seems pretty interesting, even if it is apparently quite empty. And like, while the dialogue isn't really my thing, some of the clips people shared weren't, you know, the worst. The internet can sometimes reach a critical mass with this kind of thing, right? Where the pile on becomes a pile up, right? And the first couple are total write-offs. But by the end, it's really more of just a light scratch, and you're sort of left wondering, I don't know if that really, qualified, right? Still, a paint by numbers story doesn't seem like the best way to get people to engage with, some complex and interesting world building, and yeah, if people are bored by the broader plot, then they're going to pay more attention to the minutia, and that means the dialogue really has to shine. And if it doesn't work, then people are going to have some problems, right? I think it's very telling that even the highest scoring reviews said that the story was something to be ignored or tolerated. The problem is, by all accounts, the story, you're sort of railroaded into the story for the first 8-ish hours of what could be a 15-hour-long game. And that is a tough pill to swallow. Almost as tough as the cyanide pill I intend on taking, because I accidentally clicked open the GamingNexus review again, and now I have brain worms. That's too harsh. That's so harsh. Anyway, thank you for watching. Make sure you read all of the reviews in the details below. Give them all a click and a read, and get the full info on them. And yeah, give me, I don't know, let me know what you think. If you're looking down there, you might notice there's a thumbs up and a subscribe button if you care to do it. The podcast that I'm on every week is back this week, the GA podcast at thegapodcast.com. You can also check out our end of the year review podcast from last year. It was 12 and a half hours long. I am wasted by the end of it. Yeah, pretty obliterated. It's highly unprofessional. It's good stuff. You should definitely check it out. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Reviews in Review is back. I hope everyone has a really good 2023. And stay safe. Love you. Bye.